Warning, this review of Gone Home will not feature any of the following terms: SJW, Feminazi, MRA, Gamer Dude Bro, Walking Simulator, or any variation of the terms thereof.
Don't get me wrong, I do have plenty of strong thoughts and words to describe the current climate of mainstream games criticism, but so many reviews of this game in particular just seem like easy platforms to hoist a soapbox, and most people who do that sort of thing, no matter what their views are, just seem so bitterly myopic. Maybe if I play Hatred, I'll join in, but until then, those last few sentences are about as meta as I want to get. Besides, if you've been watching this channel for a while, you know very well why I'm reviewing this. I wrote this game off at the end of my Metro review, but I knew even back then, even though I'm not overburdened with subscribers, that I'd have to explain why I dislike this game so, or I'd just be another guy taking a cheap shot at Gone Home. So here it is, I just replayed Gone Home and here is what I think of it. It's not very good. In fact, I think it kind of sucks a little. Not even in a particularly bombastic way. The first few minutes are really good though, digging around the house is proper immersive, and the game gets a lot of the little details right. The house really does resemble a house, even though it's quite huge by anyone's standards, and frankly I'm not sure how a flagging author and a park ranger could get enough of an income to support a house this big even in 1995, but once you get past the pure size, it makes enough sense as a location, and going through each room on your own volition means you can take in the proceedings at your own pace. Admittedly, the haunted house angle is so phony and forced, I'm not sure who Fulbright was trying to fool, and it doesn't make sense to include a red herring in a game supposed to invoke true realism and immersion, but there's just enough flavour scattered throughout to make the Greenbriars feel like a real family with a real story that isn't overwritten enough to destroy the atmosphere, but is just interesting enough to keep you interested. That is, until...
Oh my god. You are so lucky you finished high school before we moved into this house.
Yeah, my verdict on Gone Home pretty much comes down to these sodding journal entries. When you read particular in-world notes, the voice of Sam will come barreling through to tell you what she's written down in her journal, which you don't physically discover until the very end of the game. You want to know why this doesn't work? Well kids, here's a bit of Film 101. There are two types of audio in works of fiction, diegetic and non-diegetic. Diegetic audio is audio the characters in the media can physically hear themselves, like most sound effects. Non-diegetic audio is that which the characters cannot hear, and only the player or viewer can, like background music or narration. Diegetic and non-diegetic elements can obviously extend past audio, but that is where most of its implementations are evident. Relating back to Gone Home, it should be obvious why these journal entries were a bad idea. Everything in the game, everything outside of these journal entries, is diegetic. The game is built around being completely immersive, and there being nothing you see that Katie, the character you actually play as, does not. And even though some of the external prompts that show off Katie's character clash with the ones that don't, and just highlight the artificiality of Gone Home being a game, it's a compromise I'm willing to look past. But these journal entries completely break the sense of immersion and definitely highlight Katie's complete lack of character. When I was playing this game and running across an entry after looking at nothing, I just had to wonder to myself where, in the game, these were coming from. I know they physically come from the journal sitting at the attic, but opening that is how you end the game. So does this mean Gone Home is entirely a flashback where Katie remembers all these little items around the house as she's reading through the journal right at the end? Of course not, that would be stupid. No, Occam's razor dictates that the journal entries are there because the developers wanted to make the story more punchy, more driven, and less oblique. And there's nothing inherently wrong with giving an abstract story a better sense of pace, but considering the great pains Fulbright went to make this house feel like a home that's been lived in and exists and stuff, these journal entries playing from Katie's head with ambient acoustic guitar playing over them just completely destroy the atmosphere. And it turns Gone Home from a game about exploring this house and discovering its mysteries at your own pace to a game with a linear A plot and several B plots. Yeah, going through the first 20 minutes and sticking to the ground floor makes you think you're in for a game with lots of charm and intrigue, even if it turns out to be rather mundane, and that would be okay if it was trying to make the point that everyone has a story to tell or something like that, but it's just way more transparent than it thinks it is. And when those journal entries pop up in perpetuity, it makes the story look like a linear beginning, middle and end affair. which it is at the end of the day. So when all you're left with is Sam's sexual identity crisis and a relationship with Lonnie, it really highlights how little there is to actually do in Gone Home, and not just in a mechanical sense. I can get behind games with very little mechanical focus. Deadly Premonition, for example. That's a game whose greatest strength is its characterization and the immersion of the town, but it's working in tandem alongside the murder mystery it's using as its opening hook, and as a result I wanted to talk to the townspeople much more than I wanted to shoot these things. And talking to townspeople requires less concentration and button presses. I got invested because I had a real sense of connection to these people, and there were many mysteries to solve, not just because I had to, but because I wanted to. But with Gone Home's rather singular plot setup, all of the mystery of the Greenbrier house dissipates past the first 20 minutes, and then you're just being led by the nose through this one character arc and its journal-shaped breadcrumbs. A lot of little things don't make sense in this either. For one, I would argue that the game spending as much time as it does on Sam and Lonnie to the detriment of every other character in the game makes its message kind of avaricious, I guess? I mean, I get the impression I'm meant to look back on these women in their late teens and view every one of their actions as righteous or justified. But you know, I was a late teen as well. Not that long ago, in fact. And even now, I can tell you I had my moments of brazen youthful stupidity, born from complete impulsiveness. Like, I think I was meant to be happy at the ending, but I wasn't. Lonnie is looking to get court-martialed, and I don't get the impression Fulbright were trying to make a point like that rather than give these tragic characters a happy ending. For one part where the game really falls over is this particular journal entry where Sam says, apropos of nothing, she brought up her sexuality to her parents and they say verbatim, it's just a phase. Now, anyone with a remote moral standing would call Mr. and Mrs. Greenbrier bullshit parents at this, but the problem is the game never hints at this aside from maybe the 2 Bibles scattered around the house. But usually in stories about the plight of the homosexual and the pressures besides, those pressures are usually a lot more omnipresent. Yeah, just one journal entry, and not a particularly relevant one. I wouldn't want to be one of those sycophants to tell you that characters have to be particular this and that for a reason, but this really bugs me. I feel like I'm being ranted at about nothing in particular just because the other person had a chip on their shoulder. And as someone who's been in both positions, let me tell you, there are no winners in that situation. So I guess I should wrap this up before I'm just ranting. I mean, I could go on all day about how this game doesn't work on a fundamental level, but to put it simply, it's too transparent. That is the long and short of it. Anything good? Riot Girl soundtrack isn't so bad, even though mentions of Slater Kinney are completely omitted from the game for some reason, and L7, mercifully. The architecture looks quite good, but a lot of the individual items look terrible when you pick them up. And even though I despise the journal entries on a conceptual level, I'd have to concede the voice actor for Sam is one of the best I have heard in games in recent years. She needs more work, frankly. And I'll admit the game was a lot more fun the second time around, but, you know, there were other reasons for that. Oh, and speaking of games that might be better plastered... Yeah, that's a hell of a transition. Look, I didn't beat this game, alright? I might not have even made it halfway, but I just can't stomach opening up this game even one more time for the sake of a full review, and I'm not sure I can make a full review even if I had beaten it at the rate this game was going. So for a bit of a breather after that super serious dose of criticism, here's me talking about a stupid 3D mascot platformer. So here's a rhetorical question for you. When you think of games from the PS2 era that haven't received a HD upgrade yet, what do you think of? Maximo? Ring of Red? Shadow Hearts? Haunting Ground? Obscure? No, apparently it's Legend of K we needed to see again. See, I remember way back when games magazines were still a thing, and I'd seen a number of reviews for this game just hovering around the 6 or 7 out of 10 range, pretty much just calling the game void of surprises. But shit, it surprised me when this game randomly got re-released with the marketing calling it a cult classic. No cult that I've ever heard of, I can tell you that. I was just so gobsmacked at this re-release's existence that I had to get it. Kind of like when Gang of 4 was releasing new albums all of a sudden. But after I got the game, I remembered. Gang of 4's new albums all suck. And yeah, nothing about the intro grabbed me in the slightest. For one, this comic book paneling style of storytelling needs desperate reassessment. I think everyone and their mum has caught on that this is only used by game developers when they can't afford cutscenes. Indeed, the game being built on roughly the same cost as a Big Mac becomes very evident very quickly. For one,
the master's hitting the bottle and barely able to stand. Su Ling is prattling on about the way, and meanwhile we've been practically invaded by rats and gorillas.
Oh good, I always wanted to play as a main character whose voice actor couldn't act. I could seriously make a supercut of K's lines, and I still don't think it'd be enough to demonstrate how his voice actor might be one of the worst I have ever come across. Moreover, I might have stuck up for Dust's art style, but this is pretty lo-fi. This feudal China getup, I mean, this is the sort of level you see as a gimmick in Crash Bandicoot. It's not an original art style to base an entire game around. What's more is that this game came out at a time where the divide between casual games and hardcore games was getting hard to ignore, and reconciliation was a fool's errand. This was the same year as Shadow the Hedgehog after all. But Legend of K, if there is such a thing as an uncanny valley of edginess, K lands straight in there. The story is a pretty typical evil empire is subjugating land, and the chosen one, a child or teen warrior, is forced to take up the mantle after the fight is taken to his homeland. Pretty basic so far, but the characters here are weirdly puerile. I saw the main character literally use the phrase "rat bastard" a few times, and even though the aesthetic is mostly meant to be cute and inoffensive, the dirtiness of the circumstances is just kind of a weird clash. There's just something really off-putting, even scary about the game. And I just got done playing Outlast again. It's not edgy and confronting enough to feel like a real choice, nor is it charmingly try-hard enough to be quaint. It just feels wrong to watch these characters say and do the things they do. I felt like I was in a Silent Hill game. You may notice I haven't said a single word about the gameplay of Legend of K. And that's because there isn't a hell of a lot to say. It's a 3D platformer with a focus on melee combat and a few racing and puzzle sections to break things up. Admittedly, it does a few kinda, sorta, maybe interesting things with its level design. A lot of the levels are large in size and have a lot of offshoot areas, forcing you to go to several different sub-areas for various objectives. And this leads to the game making its secrets and power-ups feel pretty rewarding, and it does give the world a slight sense of scale. But having levels as huge as this, with objectives explicitly made to be busy work, starts to work against itself when you realise some levels can take over an hour, and most of the obstacles are either bog standard or stunningly obtuse. See this set of barrels? All you have to do is break enough of them to make an arrow towards one of the walls. I understood how to do this, but the implementation of this was so clumsy I had to print screen the game when it was giving me the answer and play the section in windowed mode just so I could have a frame of reference for what to do. The combat is actually quite good though. K has a lot of moves, a number of defensive options, there's a pretty good focus on positioning, or at least more than like Bayonetta. There's a good sense of momentum and power, but on the flip side, enemies tend to block a lot of hits, forcing you to use rather systematic means to take them down, and making combat strangely unsatisfying in the long run. It sucks because this is probably the only part of the game with a real pulse, but it just gets annoying to fight through. And when I got to this overlong part of an already overlong level that solely consists of combat, I gave up and never booted the game again. I still stand by my purchase though. I would never have guessed this game, which I never played and sat at the recesses of my memory, would get a HD re-release. And it was fun in the sense of trying to see why this game of all games got the re-release, while games of real artistic merit like Rule of Rose have to languish in rarity / obscurity. But at the end of it all, I have to wonder if it's simply because a developer I have never heard of is trying one last time to make a buck. There isn't really any reason for you, the viewer, to get this, unless maybe you get a kick out of listening to a crackly voiced teen cat deliver some 4 out of 10 one-liners. But if I wanted to do that, I'd just play Peace Walker.